Welcome to Better Than We Found It, the podcast for leaders driven to leave a positive mark through their leadership.
I hope that I will have created some ways in which the circumstances of your birth don't predict the opportunities you have in your life.
I'm Josh Huggins, your host and the founder of GS2 Partnership, a search firm committed to connecting visionaries dedicated to environmental and social betterment.
I have two young sons. I want to be able to tell them I did use the resources and expertise of a company to try to create more awareness about climate change.
In each episode, we delve into the minds of executive and future leaders. We discuss how sustainability guides responsible leadership, sparks change, and drives value.
The way of thinking I try and advocate is for us all to think about us having a collective problem to fix, which is climate, and that we need to rebuild our global economy.
We are GS2, and we are on a critical journey to connect to those who believe in leaving the world better than we found it. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Better Than We Found It, the podcast where we explore the intersection of leadership and sustainability through candid conversations with those who are helping to shape a sustainable future. And today is an interesting episode because it's also the start of our fourth season of Better Than We Found It, which coincides nicely with the third anniversary of GS2, our recruitment business, which focuses on placing individuals and connecting those who believe in leaving the world better than we found it. It's quite a momentous occasion to get to 3 years in business, and I just want to say a huge thank you to everybody that we've interacted with, either through the podcast or through our recruitment business, our clients trusting us to make the appointments that they need to accelerate their business and drive value creation, through sustainability, for our job seekers and candidates who trust us to help them take the next step in their career, and everybody else within the community that's shown words of support and has been on the journey with us. It's been quite a ride to get to this stage, and we're so excited about the future. So in today's episode, my guest is Harlin Singh. She is the Managing Director and Global Head of Sustainable Investing at Citi Wealth. But Harlin's journey to this point has been as expansive as the client portfolio she now advises. From starting in foreign exchange markets and looking at structured products to now pioneering Citi Wealth's global sustainable investment platform, she's consistently aligned financial power with purpose. And with her clients who now think in generations, not in quarters, her approach really blends investment insight with deep policy understanding and a passion for legacy building. And in the episode, we unpack how her career developed. We dive into how values-aligned investing is developing and progressing as years go by, and we explore about what the future of wealth looks like in a world that demands more from its capital. So whether you're building a sustainability strategy, you're advising clients, or you're just curious in how private wealth is evolving through the lens of sustainability, this one's not to be missed, and let's dive right in. So Harlin, welcome to Better Than We Found It.
Thanks, Josh. Great to be here.
Yes, we've had some technical issues that we won't repeat getting to this stage, but I'm glad we're finally talking, and hopefully everything goes to plan. So for those of the audience who aren't perhaps aware of of who you are, I've done a little bit of an intro, but I'm sure I can not do it justice. So would you mind just giving a quick overview of who you are and your role today?
Sure. My name is Harlin Singh. I'm responsible for sustainable investing for Citi's wealth business. And what that means in real terms is I work with our clients with their own personal finances and their personal investments, and help them align and think about their sustainability objectives and how it might be met across a variety of different asset classes.
Excellent. Well, very keen to get into that and to hear more, because it's a different approach to any guest I've had previously in terms of the area of market that you focus on. So keen to hear about that, but equally excited to understand your career journey, because when my colleague Greg introduced us, I obviously looked back at your pathway and realized that it was unique and very interesting. So keen to hear more. So perhaps if we could go back to the start. I think I saw that your career began in FX, working, I think, still with ultra high net worth individuals. But tell me about that initial journey into financial services, and perhaps what those early years taught you about the kind of concept of risk and value and the individual perspective that you now bring to your career?
So are you saying it's not entirely intuitive that I started out in foreign exchange and somehow ended up in sustainability? There are links, I promise. So it's not entirely kind of random walk, as one would say in equities. But, I started my career over 20 years ago now, which is surprising to hear myself say that. But in the FX market, as you said, and in the structuring market. So when I graduated university in the early 2000s, I actually thought I was going to go to law school, believe it or not. My dad was an attorney, and I felt, as the eldest child, felt that I would follow in his footsteps. And I thought, well, how do I differentiate myself in the sea of applicants for law school? And I thought getting a couple of years of work experience in banking, which is unusual for lawyers, perhaps, would be a good start. And I started at a small shop called Lehman Brothers. And on the trading desk, and I kind of fell in love. The high energy, the kind of adrenaline that goes with that, the ability to really kind of analyze global markets, and the pace at which you need to just take in information and make decisions. So I ended up having a lot of fun, and I stuck around for quite a number of years. But you're right. I started working with institutional investors at first, and then started to cover high net worth individuals at that time. And the thing with working with high net worth individuals, it's very relationship driven. So you really get to know people on a very personal level versus when you're covering an institutional client who is investing on behalf of the institution. So it's a bit of a different dynamic. And just to kind of put that into context, I still remember in September of 2008 when the firm was looking like it was not going to survive the financial crisis. I was getting a number of calls from clients just asking, are you okay? Do you need help with finding a next role? What do you think's going to happen? Kind of a very human relationship with clients in that way. And so at the time, during those years from graduating college to kind of 2008, and being in the FX markets, the amazing thing was that it's a global macro market. So not just developed markets, but also emerging markets. And so there was a big focus on Asia, the BRICS, if anybody remembers. So Brazil, Russia, India, China, and the growth and economic opportunity there, which really kind of was exciting from a just understanding broad economics, being able to participate in markets that in many cases are illiquid from, an equities perspective. During that time, also, I started a program in financial literacy in Harlem, New York with the Promise Academy, which was a lot of fun, very rewarding. Got to work with, high schoolers in an after school program, teaching them the basics of finance and markets and all of that. And so, social service had always been a part of my life. And then from there, went on to Deutsche Bank. And then I took a clean break, right? At Deutsche Bank, I discovered microfinance, and I took a little bit of a break, and I went back to grad school to study public policy and public administration. And then here we are, fast forward, went through kind of my first job after grad school. I was fortunate to be able to go full time. And then my first role after that was with the Milken Institute in financial innovation. So kind of marrying the two topics together. And then came back to Citi and banking to bring it to kind of connect the two sides of my career.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'm going to take a pause and follow up on a few key points there. So my first thing was, so you mentioned that social, the social area of giving back and community was something that's always been important to you. Where did that come from?
Yeah, from family, from, the faith I was raised in. There's a strong component of selfless service. And so since I was old enough to walk, this concept of serving others was ingrained in me. So it first started in our house of worship, where, a safe space for kind of a 3, 4, 5-year-old to start dip their toes in the water in terms of service. And then, I, in high school, created a program for children with learning disabilities with a friend of mine. I've worked in hospitals, volunteered in hospitals for many years, meditation, yoga, all of that, kind of bringing that into patient care. So it's always been ingrained in me in terms of who I was. I think a lot of people have similar values and grew up in ways, whether early childhood or in their adult life, have taken on these kind of community service. And that's how a lot of us find ourselves in this industry. And I think that's great, right? Because it gives you such a good context and grounding in terms of what you're trying to achieve professionally.
So my second point is, so you mentioned that your father was in the law profession. That was the route that you thought you were going down. And then when did it tip to you to think, actually, I'm enjoying this too much, and I'm not going to do that? And what was his view when you had that?
Yeah. So in all honesty, I honestly still don't. I think my parents are still very confused that I'm in banking. But being on a trading floor for several years. So number one, I kind of became addicted to the pace and the energy and the intellectual challenge of being in that role. I was in what we called structuring. So that is using derivatives and options to create exposures to investment markets. And there was I always loved math. I loved calculus. So for me, this was kind of a safe space for me. But I will say, going into the law profession after being in trading for a few years is nearly impossible. I don't think I could sit still and read a brief after working at a pace like that. So it just kind of became what I wanted to do. I did know that I wanted to go back and get my master's at some point, just because I love to learn. And quite frankly, I love university campuses. So that did end up happening, but unfortunately it was never that law degree.
Understood. Yeah. And leaving, a role where you'd got to a certain level of seniority to pursue a master's is not, I suppose, the traditional finance career move. But not only that, it wasn't a master's in business administration that I would see more commonly, but it was, the master's in public administration. So, of course, you've mentioned already about your focus around social and thinking about communities. But what was it that really inspired you to take that break and to do that extra qualification? And how did it further shape your perspective on how you viewed the world?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's not entirely, I guess, intuitive either, right? To your point, right? It seems a little bit off the beaten path because most people will go for a master's in business administration. I had been, if you've been following the timelines, I had been in the markets now for about 12 years before I went back to get my master's. And I intentionally didn't apply for an MBA program, not because I think there's anything wrong with MBAs. I just felt it wouldn't be a strong enough pivot because I didn't want to come back and after my degree and continue in FX, right? I wanted to do something different and I wanted to figure out how to take my skills in finance and in markets to do good in the world. I actually thought when I started my MPA, I thought I was going to leave the industry entirely and maybe go to a foundation or a nonprofit and kind of fundraise and help to take them to the next level. So I felt like I had a skills gap in that. And that's what I was trying to resolve with the program. And I came about like impact investing and social entrepreneurship, and it just clicked. It was one of those things where, I didn't know I could do what I'm kind of good at and what I've done for a few years, and also something that I'm super passionate about.
And for those not so familiar with an MPA, could you just give a quick overview of what it involves and how it's put together?
Yeah, it's a great degree where, I went to NYU. They had several tracks within the MPA program. So you could go down a policy track, master's in public health. So obviously a different degree, but within the School of Public Administration. And then you could do a focus on finance, a focus on management, and a focus on broadly policy. So you kind of had these different tracks that you could go into, but you also had to take a certain level of core curriculum that was across all of these areas. And so what I found it to be really great for is the program was really designed with kind of practitioners in mind. So it was less theoretical, more application. And so there were quite a few classes around social entrepreneurship, quite a few classes around kind of developing theories of change, design thinking. So really a well-rounded degree. There were finance courses available. And the other interesting thing was we could take classes at the School of Business as well. So you kind of were able to manufacture the degree to what you wanted it to be in some ways, with that kind of core foundational coursework, which is why I chose that program.
And were there other students on there who were from the finance field?
Very few. I think I was one of maybe 2 or 3 who I came across. I was also probably, this is going to sound maybe bad, but I was also probably like on the older side, right? There were a lot of people who went, and a lot of people go to grad school right after undergrad, which is an amazing path, right? It's great. Then you come out much stronger. But there were fewer people who, were so far into their careers who decided to do this. I was also one of very few who did it full time. And the reason I wanted to do it full time was not just kind of managing the workload, but I really wanted to dedicate myself to something different. And so if I was working part time, I felt that I would constantly be kind of pulled back, and then I might get the degree and then almost not do anything with it. So, I was lucky that I was able to go full time.
Sure. And I think you mentioned to me that was the time where the real understanding around impact investing came to the fore, and perhaps being so dedicated, it allowed you to explore these different areas to come forward. And that seems like it was quite a pivotal moment in your career to see how the different areas, as you say, you've worked in and had a passion for could come together and to really drive change in capital's role in society. So what was it that was prominent for you in that discovery, and what did it start to make you think about what would happen for your career and where you wanted to spend your time?
Yeah, I would say that there were impact investing had certainly been there for a couple of decades before that. And there were people who I've met throughout my career who have been kind of the pioneers in this space who I admire greatly. But to some degree, I think you're right. It was kind of reaching this inflection point of becoming something that was not so completely niche, but more widely accessible from both an intellectual standpoint as well as a practitioner standpoint. So, I had some exposure through one of the institutions in which I worked in microfinance. And, they had a microfinance fund that had been running for several years. And that's where it started to kind of make some sense to me. Until then, that was the only way that I understood really impact and finance coming together was through this field of microfinance, where now, as you and I and probably the audience knows, impact is happening in every sector around us. And there's constantly more innovation in terms of what the structures look like. So, it was certainly an aha kind of moment for me personally, because I had such limited exposure. There were people in the program who had a bit more exposure than I did. And while I was there, we started kind of a student association on impact investing. And that now has taken on a whole new shape and form. So it's great to see the evolution of that. And they had just started some coursework within the School of Public Policy on impact investing as well. So it was just kind of this point in time, to your point. It was just there, that inflection point.
And for those listening who perhaps have gone down a more traditional career path to date and are thinking about making that shift, clearly not everybody's in the fortunate position to be able to go and study full time. And, so of course, if somebody is, I'm sure you would say do it. But if they weren't, thinking about the journey that you've been through, what would you give as some advice to how people can immerse themselves in these other areas to broaden their experience, to at least give them the viewpoint of what it might be that they really want to do?
Yeah. So the amazing thing that's happened in academia since I went to school, and maybe it was around then, but not as available or widely, or I was that aware of, just given what I was doing on a day-to-day basis at that point, is there are a lot of kind of free resources out there as well now. There's just been so much academia published. There are so many keynote speakers and programs that you can kind of take part in, certificate programs that are less time intensive, less financially intensive to commit to develop that understanding and those skills. I will say though, as I've grown my team here over the last few years, one of the most kind of important things I think about is you have to understand finance and markets, right? So to some degree, like having that traditional, finance background can actually be a benefit if you have the commitment and you've made some progress and some demonstrated some commitment to the space. So I don't think there's a right or wrong, right? I think there are people who have kind of traditional NGO nonprofit backgrounds as well, who bring such a different perspective, and people who have traditional investments backgrounds that bring such a unique perspectives and ground us in terms of if an investment is an investment, it needs to be evaluated as one, right? So bring that kind of lens to the table.
Sure. And as you say, you can build a team where you have people coming from those different sides, or you can be an individual that does have both and perhaps make yourself a little bit more attractive in the market. But as I've seen through recruiting in this space for quite some time now, it takes everybody to create this movement. So, whatever skill set you have, I suppose, from what we see and when we interview candidates, there will be areas there that are material to the ability you have to affect change. And it's not about running away from that. Sometimes it's about leaning into it and realizing that actually that can be the key thing for you to use, rather than the thing you need to walk away from.
Spot on. I mean, the ability to be collaborative in this space is so necessary, because you have to be able to really understand the perspectives of very diverse and different stakeholders, right? So I agree with you entirely.
So I just want to finish the journey and then get into the work you're doing at Citi. So the Milken Institute, that was the role that you went straight into after the MPA. Could you just talk a bit more about exactly what your role was there? And it seemed like you held a number of different hats in that capacity. So what did you do? And, explain a bit more about that, please.
So the Milken Institute is an incredible place. For those of you who aren't familiar, number one, it's based in Santa Monica, California, which is arguably one of the beautiful cities in the world. And they are a economic think tank, a nonpartisan economic think tank. They do a ton of work around philanthropy, around public health, around policy. And then the team I was in was the innovative finance team. And we were tasked with bringing together public and private sector individuals and players to think through large environmental and social issues and construct new financing models where there are current market failures. So examples, we did a project on vaccine delivery in Indonesia. Indonesia is a large archipelago, as you know, and healthcare delivery is often challenging in some of the smaller islands. Vaccines are also expensive. And so how do we work with the government, with the health sector, with investors to structure financing opportunities to bring down the cost of vaccines and also make them available to people who live in remote areas? So that was one project. We while I was there, we did a project on childhood nutrition. We did a project on green bonds. We did a project on electric vehicles. So, all over the map from topic areas for sure. And the one, I think, superpower of the Milken Institute is the ability to convene very just accomplished human beings. My 3 months into my role there was the global conference, and having dinner sitting next to heads of state, which was just an amazing access to people who had the power to affect change. So I think that it certainly taught me a lot. I learned a lot. I did a ton of research. I got to meet some incredible players in this space. And it was a lot of fun. A lot of interesting travel too.
For sure. Yeah. And I think that the interesting part for me, and again, in looking at your career, is that there's a lot of, we speak to lots of individuals every single week. And there is a viewpoint from some that although they're passionate and they want to have impact, that perhaps joining a non-profit organization or an organization that isn't truly commercially focused in that capitalistic sense might be a drawback for them in their future career if they want to move back into the private sector. But you've clearly shown that it's been a positive for you, and the exposure and the ability to do so has been beneficial. Would you say that there's been any limitation to the kind of MPA and the non-profit part of your career to where you are now, or has it only been an enhancement?
I think that without those two, I would not be in the seat that I'm in today. So, when I came back into banking, I rejoined Citi in Los Angeles as essentially a portfolio manager for clients within Southern California and the Western region, not in the seat that I'm in currently. And the reason I took that role, number one, I was coming back to Citi. I was coming back to a leadership team that I admired and knew for many years. So when you come back to an organization, for those of you who might have done that in your career paths, I think that happens more often than we even think. But you're coming back to often because the leaders who are there are people who you believed in, who believe in you, who you have a certain level of comfort with. And, during the interview process, I actually asked the question, ultra high net worth individuals and family offices obviously have a good majority of them have philanthropic endeavors. They want to do something. They want to have a legacy. They think about these big intractable issues. How can we as a wealth manager help them? And should we be doing more? And that kind of sparked this conversation that initially there was kind of, well, that's really interesting and maybe something we should explore. But I came into this seat as a portfolio manager, and very quickly, I think it was a week later, I got a call saying, hey, we know you have this experience from the Milken Institute and this desire to build something around impact for our clients. And we actually do think that's an opportunity for us to help our clients because we have these capabilities in the investment bank, et cetera. And so do you want to help us think this through? And so it became a double hatting situation for a little bit, until the role was created. So brand new role, the role was created. I helped write the job description. In fact, I helped interview people for the role as well.
Well as yourself.
As well as myself. I actually, at the time was living in LA and didn't want to move back to New York. And so, and then eventually somebody asked me, quite senior, asked me to raise my hand for the role and said, we think that given your understanding of private banking and markets and the impact space, it would be a really good fit for you to be leading this for us. And so, to your point, doing taking that step back, I was scared because I didn't know what was going to happen. When I left Deutsche Bank, I had a title of director. And so it was quite a senior role. And I knew I'd be starting over. And when I went to the Milken Institute, right, I did take a step back in terms of seniority, to do something I was passionate about. So, these days, I think that there are probably other paths, even if you did it part-time or you did go full-time, that you could get quite a senior role because there are so many more companies focused on this area.
For sure. But I suppose really doubling down on what you're passionate about, and knowing that it's the right thing to do has paid dividends for you in terms of this opportunity, because if you hadn't, as you said, you hadn't gone there, that conversation perhaps wouldn't have been sparked, which might not have created that opportunity. And I think sometimes you can talk it into existence when you really believe in it, and that's a superpower.
Yeah, I think so.
Brilliant. So tell us more about the role then, because it sounds like, building this platform from what was the ground up. Of course, Citi is a huge organization, and I'm sure there were lots of other things that they were doing that you could kind of lean on, but actually creating it yourself is, no small feat. So how did you go about it? What was your approach? Tell us a bit about gaining momentum to make sure this was a success.
I made lots of friends. So coming back to our earlier conversation around collaboration. So I joke with people that when I started in this role, people would, look at, my LinkedIn or invite me to speak on a panel, and they'd say, oh my gosh, you have this big role. You're the global head of sustainable investing. And the joke is always I was the global head of myself for a good year and a half. And so, and why I say making friends is, Citi, as you can imagine, is a large institution with a lot of people in different function areas, and a lot of people with a lot of passion actually about the topic. which I was really pleasantly surprised about. And when I initially started in the role, we had a group of, I don't know, somewhere around like 80 people who raised their hand and said, I want to contribute in some way and kind of help you and help us think through what it is that our clients want. And in my function, contribute to kind of the success of this. And so it was great. My team is nowhere near 80 people right now, but, built those right relationships across the firm, built the governance and the processes that needed to exist, got the buy-in from the relevant stakeholders. And, it's been a great journey.
And when, I think one of the things that we were talking about before we started here is, sometimes the volumes of these roles within firms are not as high as some of us would like, but actually when great sustainability really happens is through collaboration and recognizing and realizing that everybody has elements of passion around something, and if you can tap into that and bring that all together, then that's where an organization can really make it and drive change, rather than it needing to be a big central team that's managing everything and it's their responsibility. Actually, if you can pass it down and get buy-in, it can really work. So it sounds like that philosophy stood you in good stead for now where you are, and I think that's something.
Yeah, and I think even if you look at it from the perspective of outcomes, right? Most of us in this space are passionate about sustainability, right? I'll speak for myself. For me, it's not about the title. It's not about the size of the team or the kind of power I may wield or not within an organization. It's about the outcome. It's about addressing sustainability challenges. It's about meeting our clients' needs. It's about, kind of connecting the dots for those clients. And I actually think that having, the right collaboration with the teams across the business results in better sustainability outcomes than keeping it siloed for us, right? Because we've been able to now, I've been able to partner with the people who are running different asset classes and different types of investments in order to kind of help them think through what is the governance and what do the products need to look like for this, and then empowering them to go out and either build or do the due diligence on certain investment opportunities. And why I think that's better than it being kind of a centralized function is because then it becomes part of BAU, right? And so it doesn't become okay, here's a nice to have, it's somewhere sitting here on the side. It's part and parcel of the client discussion and dialogue. And I think that's where you do kind of really well by both the client as well as the sustainability outcomes.
Sure, absolutely. I agree and completely agree with that principle. And we see it more and more in demand from the clients we work with now, and the types of mandates that we're engaged upon are for people who understand that philosophy and aren't so precious, I suppose, about building their mini empire, but actually delivering the outcomes that are needed. So I think that's true. So I'm keen to move on to the topic around sustainable value creation and aligning capital with purpose, but still to create valuable outcomes. In the context of ultra high net worth individuals and these private wealth clients, how do you define that? And in terms of the conversations that you might have with a client, what's the process to understand what value is for you and for them?
Yeah, so there's an old adage that goes something along the lines of, if you've met one family office, you've met one family office. And so the other kind of fun thing, I find it fun, some people might find it infuriating, but the one fun thing that I find is that all of our clients are incredibly unique in terms of how they think about impact and sustainability. And so when we're having these discussions there's a lot of kind of push-pull in terms of defining what sustainability means, what impact means to each individual, and defining how those outcomes need to look in the context of a portfolio. So for some clients, and what I'm noticing increasingly now, which is inspiring, for some clients, it's all financial. And for some clients, it's all philanthropic. And increasingly, there's kind of this almost gray area between philanthropic and financial, where people are willing to kind of play in, right? And that might mean taking greater risk or longer illiquidity, lower returns, anything along those lines in order to have maximize impact. The structures of the deals are starting to change, where there might be things that have first loss components to them, low cost debt, things like that. And I think that, when I first started in this role, there was investments and there was philanthropy, and never saw the two meet. And now that kind of meeting of the minds, or this idea that capital is fungible, not just even across philanthropic and investment, but also operating businesses. Many of our clients are entrepreneurs themselves and operators, and have their businesses that are considering how to approach sustainability. So, long answer to your question is, these conversations tend to be quite complex, and it's usually not something that you solve for in one day, in one meeting. And it's also evolving, right? You might have a client who started with, I want market rate, I want to evaluate climate risk in my portfolio. And then over time, they're thinking about impact more, and they're looking at private markets, or they're looking to structure deals or de-risk or something like that, right? And so it evolves. And I think that we have to make it okay for people to change their minds and for it to evolve. Otherwise, you kind of turn people off.
For sure. And I think that's the part that really interests me around this, because it sounds very much like of course, the relationship is built on trust, and they have to really trust you and be able to talk openly and feel that they can air their opinions at the current point, but also, as you say, feel as though they're not going to be judged if then they change their mind, or that they have a different viewpoint, and how that works. Because I suppose unless they can communicate clearly to you what they need, it's very difficult for you to then structure, the portfolio in a way that can actually deliver those outcomes that they're looking for. Of course, in current climates, ESG can be quite polarizing in conversations. So how does it actually work with the client in terms of this becoming a topic of conversation? Is it ingrained into the discovery work and the engagements that you have with them? Are they kept separate, and it's only if somebody talks about it that then it gets opened up? Like, how does it? What's the process of how that goes? If you're happy to share that.
I would say yes, and right, because it's more art, less science, and so as we get to know clients, we start to understand, what their needs are from a financial perspective, from a business perspective. Many of them have philanthropic endeavors. Either they have a family foundation, or they're contributing to a donor advised fund, or they're, donating to a variety of causes, and they'll start to talk about things like that. Areas like climate risk, I think, are becoming a bit more kind of front of mind for investors in terms of, we saw the wildfires in LA. We've kind of been seeing what the cost of drought and flooding has done to prices of coffee and cocoa and champagne, and wine regions are changing, right? So these are not topics that are hidden so much behind kind of the scientific minds, but are much more kind of part of our daily kind of talking and exploring with clients about what's top of mind for them. And then the investment opportunities also, especially in infrastructure, in climate adaptation. So like how infrastructure is going to cope with the changing climate, for example. Areas like healthcare and healthcare for populations that have historically kind of not been able to access affordable healthcare. Housing and housing constraints, right? These are topics that I think are less polarizing because they're quite kind of factual and people see and feel them. And then there is also, when we start to think about, I think the reason why ESG became polarizing is because it meant many things to many different people. And that resulted, I think, in miscommunication and kind of a communication breakdown, versus actually talking about what the issues are, what the market failures are, and what thereby the opportunity is for investing in these areas, right? if you look at kind of affordable housing and people who qualify for and are on wait lists for affordable housing, those lists are miles long. And so there's a huge opportunity there to meet the needs of people who might not be able to afford to live in cities like London and New York, but have jobs and want to contribute and need housing, right? And so, I think there are, as we speak to these issue areas, it's very important to speak about exactly what it is that the market failure is, what the market opportunity is, what the philanthropic opportunity is, and how we're going to address all of these things.
And in dealing with different family offices, I suppose the other interesting part for me is the potentially the inter-family discussion around what's important across generations. How have you seen the attitudes towards this shift? And when you're perhaps dealing with multi-stakeholders within a family office, and of course the different perspectives that they come to this with, and how do you manage and navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, we have a really great family office advisory team that does a lot of work with intergenerational conversations around all topics, from estate planning and tax to things like philanthropy and sustainability. It's interesting. I think more increasingly families are coming together on these topics, and it might be that some of those, the matriarch or the patriarch are thinking about it from the perspective of philanthropy, and the younger generations might be seeing this kind of world of impact investing growing increasingly. But, it's interesting. Whenever I get that question, I think about, our own events and our clients who we invite. I have yet to find a pattern, right? And I think that, a lot of the kind of surveys that are published look for patterns, right? Younger people are more interested. Women are more interested. I have yet to find that, because we have, people of all age groups, of all, racial backgrounds, of all genders participating in these events, showing interest, either curious or they've been actually doing it for a long time and haven't been talking about it in the public sphere. And so, that makes me hopeful. But you're right. I mean, it is complicated when you have different views, but that's true for everything from estate planning, from how we're going to, how the operating business will evolve over time as the next generation takes over, et cetera. So, it's all.
Yeah. I just wondered if because of the view of the subject in the world, whether it became something that was more of a challenging conversation than others, or whether actually it just is another area that, as you say, kind of falls into the same category as those other areas you described.
Yeah, I mean, I think that okay, so where it gets challenging is when one family member is really interested in climate, for example, and another family member is really interested in gender or housing or education, right? Where you have different interest areas and trying to reconcile with a finite pool of capital, right? And where I find a lot of optimism is there is now, it used to be, call it even 5 years ago, right? When I started, kind of 5.5 years ago, when I started in the seat, we used to say, people get really specific about what they really care about, right? It'll be about, I want to solve gender equity in this specific region, in this specific sector. But now there's a greater understanding of systems. And that is promising, because then it's not so limiting, right? And then you're not fighting for the same dollars, but you can actually say, just like we apply portfolio theory to investing and we diversify a portfolio, we can also apply that same thinking to sustainability and diversify across sustainability issues, even if there's one thing that we're trying to solve, because all of these areas are part of one big system and they complement one another. So solving for climate, you also need to think about areas like education, healthcare, infrastructure, et cetera, right? So all of these pieces do kind of complement one another. And that I think has helped to kind of bring together these very different or unique views on specific sustainability issues in a way where you can find kind of that common ground of portfolio construction, in the same way, and diversifying across sustainability themes.
And when you look at it from or you take a step back and you think of it from a macro perspective around innovation to drive this change, I was looking at it in a kind of couple of different angles. You were thinking about emerging markets or some of the new asset classes, or even having to rely on policy frameworks. Of those three, where would you say you're seeing most innovation and desire to change? And how is that affecting the wider view that you take in terms of the advice you give?
Yeah. So just based on where I sit, I'm seeing a lot of innovation in investments. We've worked with, Citi as a whole, we work with a lot of the UN organizations, including the World Bank. We've worked on structures that are bringing together kind of investments and biodiversity and conservation efforts, plastic waste reduction, through investment structures, et cetera. So I think there's a lot of innovation on the investment side. Over the next few years, I think there will be a greater focus also on philanthropy and innovation in philanthropy and program-related investments. So how grant dollars can be actually structured in a way that are investments and therefore can be recycled over time, compounding kind of impact on the grant side. And the skill set, right? So coming back to, I guess, the genesis of this conversation around people with different skill sets, bringing unique things to the table. I think that's this kind of cross proliferation of people with an NGO background, people with an investment background, kind of switching seats or ending up in different sectors will also create more innovation.
For sure, yeah, and you mentioned it, and it was a topic area that I wanted to talk about today, but I know we're running out of time slightly. But natural capital and biodiversity are, of course, areas that are growing in prominence. But to your point earlier around climate being better understood and more mainstream now, I suppose when I look at natural capital and biodiversity, clearly these are areas that are still very understood, and they lack some clarity and, I suppose, simplification that allows it to be scaled into the mainstream. How do you turn these, I suppose, challenging or at present sometimes intangible topics into investable solutions for your clients? And how would you go through that process?
Yeah, in some cases, what we're noticing is some of our clients, they're actually, especially those who are really passionate about biodiversity and nature, are doing kind of like almost their own project finance, right? So they're finding these projects, whether it's ecosystem restoration or, we have a few clients who are really involved in mangroves, really involved in rewilding, and they're kind of taking these projects on their own as well. And there's a great deal of collaboration amongst families. And so we're finding like these pockets of leadership where a family who has either been doing this as part of their operating business for some time or been doing this as part of their philanthropy and now is kind of turning it into like this investment case as they're working with local cities and jurisdictions who need, the natural flood barriers and need, to address these kind of climate impacts through nature-based solutions, coming together and finding ways to find these partnerships. I don't think that everything needs to be mass market kind of available necessarily. And if the right investment solutions and the right funders exist, a huge amount of impact can happen, even in these kind of projects. There's greater risk, of course, right? And some of these are untested and untried, and hence, it's the more sophisticated families who have the kind of bandwidth for that type of risk appetite will pursue them. But yeah, I think, and that's why I think it's exciting, because there's still, to your point with nature and biodiversity, there's still a long road ahead.
For sure. But as you say, you're led in that capacity by your clients and their passion and tolerance for the risk because of the passion for it, which I think makes it such a unique, interesting conversation every time you're having it with different people. So
exactly. And sometimes we play a role and sometimes we don't, right? Sometimes we act as a thought leader. We have a huge research area and group that's dedicated to sustainability as well. And so we play many different roles for our clients in these areas.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing all of that. I've got some quick fire questions I'd like to get into before we wrap up. So if you were to describe your leadership style in one word, what would you use?
I'd say collaborative.
Yes, we've commented on that a few. That's not a surprise. What's one book or podcast, other, of course, than Better Than We Found It, that's deeply shaped your view of sustainable investing?
Oh God, there are so many. Okay. So the first book that I read when I started grad school was called Out of Poverty by Paul Polak, which I still refer to from time to time. I haven't picked it up, honestly, in 10 years. It's a great book that kind of opened my eyes to impact investing and kind of systems change and the power of, meeting entrepreneurs where they are, and kind of, I thought it was a great, fantastic book. A more recent book that I read was Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson, which is a dystopian kind of view of the ministry that will save us all or not. And it's an entertaining and an interesting read, something that kind of makes you think because some of it is not too far off from reality.
Well, I'd be sure to pick those up. If you were to have two dream dinner guests to talk sustainability with, they could be living or historical. Who would you choose?
Oh boy, two dinner guests. Who I would choose. Gosh, I would love to have dinner with Al Gore. He has become increasingly passionate about climate. I was just watching some of his talks during San Francisco Climate Week. And who else would I love to have dinner with? I would love to have dinner with Jane Goodall, someone who's kind of been in nature and biodiversity for longer than most of us.
Great. I'll see if I can arrange it. And then lastly, what's one investment theme that you think in the next 5 years is poised to boom?
I think it's nature. I mean, it's, we did talk about it, but I do think that the value of nature will be something that becomes increasingly important to businesses across sectors.
For sure. And I don't mind plugging a previous episode I had with Tony Goldner from the TNFD, and he shares some really interesting perspectives that if businesses aren't paying attention to this already, that they really should be thinking about and considering as part of their broader risk framework, because it's quite stark when you consider it and the impact it can have. So for sure, I see not only the risk but also the opportunity with it as well.
And I'm gonna actually add one more, just because I think that we spend a lot of time on the E and not on the S. I actually think healthcare is going to be a big one as well. With a growing population, with an aging population, the need for healthcare infrastructure and access to affordable and quality healthcare is going to be a big theme through which we kind of, as sustainability professionals, need to look through that lens.
For sure, yeah, I agree. It's not a conversation that has happened as regularly as it should, but absolutely, it's something that's going to play a part. So thank you for sharing that. Last question, then, as always, in relation to the show, is around how you personally would like your legacy to be, to, I suppose, know and show that you've left the world better than you found it.
I don't think about legacy often. I kind of like to I would prefer to be kind of the quiet person to help drive and move the needle. I would love to kind of help our clients. I'm truly kind of, I truly believe that our clients, who are individuals, irrespective of where they sit on the wealth spectrum, have the capacity, the passion, the patient capital to drive change for the long term. And I think just solving for their needs and moving the needle with kind of them making progress towards, their sustainability ambitions, and then, obviously on the flip side, seeing the outcomes from that would be a great legacy to have.
For sure, and it sounds like you're well poised to do so. So I fully support the journey, and look forward to hearing in years to come how you've been continuing to deliver that. But look, thank you so much for your time today. It's been great to get your insights and unique perspective on the subject. So really appreciate that, and I'm sure the listeners will. If there are people listening that are inspired by what you've said or are following perhaps a similar career path in the early stage, would you be happy for people to reach out and connect
Absolutely.
with you? If so, where should they get to you?
Absolutely. I'm on LinkedIn. I try to check my messages as frequently as possible, but we can start there, and then I can obviously share my contact and we can go from there. But yeah, I love kind of geeking out with people around these topics. I love having my thinking challenged. And so bring it on.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. It's been great to talk today. Really appreciate it. And I look forward to catching up soon. But thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, Josh. It was great talking to you.
So thank you for joining us on today's show of Better Than We Found It. I'm your host, Josh Huggins, the founder of GS2 Partnership, a talent solutions firm dedicated to sustainability and impact. And at GS2, we connect purpose-led individuals and leaders with roles and organisations and industries that are reshaping the world, with a particular focus on the energy transition, the renewable energy market, sustainable finance, and natural and built environment. We help organisations globally find and attract the best individuals to drive value creation through sustainability. Hopefully in today's episode with Harlin, it helped spark some ideas and questions or even a new perspective for you all on legacy. And we'd love for you to share it with other individuals and subscribe for more episodes that are upcoming with our esteemed guest. But until next time, keep creating value, keep driving change, and always aim to leave things better than you found them. Thank you.